No.
Excuse me?
I said no.
Mom.
You're not marrying him.
Mrs. Collins, I don't understand.
You don't have to.
You promised. You said if I was happy.
I changed my mind.
Can you at least tell me why?
Because I've met enough men to recognize one who will break my daughter's heart.
Most people who knew Margaret Collins thought she was impossible. The ones who knew her well thought she was protective. The truth lived somewhere between the two. At 58 years old, Margaret had spent nearly 3 decades raising her daughter alone. She wasn't cold. She wasn't cruel. She was terrified. That fear simply wore the face of control. Every morning followed the same routine. She watered the flowers lining her porch. She fed the neighborhood birds. She drank black coffee from the same chipped ceramic mug she'd owned for nearly 20 years. Then she looked at the framed photograph sitting beside the kitchen window. The picture had been taken before everything changed. Before hospitals. Before lawyers. Before betrayal. Claire was only 7 years old then. Her father, Daniel Collins, had looked like the perfect husband. Handsome. Funny. Reliable. Until he wasn't. Margaret still remembered the afternoon she found the credit card statements hidden inside his desk. Thousands of dollars. Hotel charges. Jewelry she had never received. Restaurant bills in cities he'd supposedly never visited. He hadn't simply cheated. He had built another life while pretending theirs was enough. When she confronted him, he didn't apologize. He packed a suitcase. Then he left. Just like that. No explanation. No goodbye to Claire. No second glance. Margaret had learned something that day. People lied. Especially the ones who smiled the easiest. She never forgot it. Neither did her heart. Claire had inherited none of her mother's suspicion. She believed people deserved chances. She laughed easily. She trusted quickly. She loved deeply. Sometimes too deeply. Customers often stayed longer than they planned simply because Claire remembered their names. She remembered birthdays, favorite books, coffee orders, children's names. She had a gift that couldn't be taught. She made people feel seen. Her coworkers often joked she could become friends with a brick wall. Margaret worried that one day, someone would use that kindness against her. Claire had dated before. Nothing serious. At least, nothing serious enough to survive meeting Margaret. There had been Michael. Margaret decided he wasn't ambitious enough because he worked as an elementary school teacher. Then came Jason. Margaret disliked the tattoos on his arm before she even learned his last name. Then Noah. Too quiet. Then Liam. Too confident. Then Chris. Too charming. Each relationship ended the same way. Not because Claire stopped loving them, because eventually, they grew tired of being judged before they spoke. Claire never blamed her mother out loud. But every breakup left a crack somewhere inside her. Dinner conversations had become careful dances. So, Margaret said without looking up. How was work? Busy. The bookstore owner still thinking about expanding? Maybe. Margaret nodded. Then, are you still seeing that architect? Claire stopped placing forks on the table. Ethan. I know his name. Yes. Margaret stirred the soup. I don't trust him. Claire sighed. You've spoken to him twice. Twice was enough. Claire pulled out her chair. What did he do? He talks like someone trying too hard to be liked. Claire laughed softly. Mom. I'm serious. You said Michael smiled too much. He did. You said Jason smiled too little. He did. You said Noah didn't speak enough. He didn't. You said Liam spoke too much. He did. Claire folded her arms. So what exactly would the perfect man sound like? Margaret looked at her daughter for several seconds. I'll know him when I meet him. Claire looked away toward the window. Some answers weren't worth arguing with. Claire smiled without realizing it. Margaret noticed anyway. She always noticed. She said nothing. But something tightened inside her chest. For reasons she couldn't explain, Ethan Carter made her nervous. Not because he seemed dangerous, because he seemed genuine. And after everything Daniel had done, Margaret no longer believed genuine men existed. For the first time in years, Claire felt something she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. Peace. Not excitement. Not butterflies. Peace. Ethan Carter wasn't the kind of man who tried to impress people. He simply paid attention. He remembered little things. Her favorite author. The song she always skipped because it reminded her of her father. The fact that she hated carnations because Daniel used to buy them only after he'd done something wrong. He listened. Really listened. That alone made him different. The book wasn't expensive. In fact, the receipt tucked inside showed he had bought it at a second-hand shop for $12. Claire laughed. You kept the receipt? I forgot to take it out. You know most guys would hide that. Ethan shrugged. I'd rather spend money making memories than pretending I'm rich. Claire smiled. It was such an ordinary sentence. Yet somehow, it stayed with her. Over the next 6 months, Ethan slowly became part of her routine. He fixed the loose shelf inside the bookstore without being asked. He helped an elderly customer carry groceries across the parking lot. He volunteered on Saturdays teaching architecture students at the community center. He never posted any of it online. Most people never knew. Claire noticed. And every time she did, she wondered why someone this kind still wasn't married. Margaret noticed something too. Claire was happier, which somehow worried her even more. Because happiness made people careless. He drives an old pickup. Margaret muttered to herself. The truck had nearly 200,000 miles on it. The paint had faded. The driver's seat had been stitched together twice. It wasn't impressive. Margaret immediately decided that meant Ethan lacked ambition. She didn't know. The truck had belonged to Ethan's late grandfather. He refused to sell it because it was the last thing he owned that still smelled faintly of sawdust and engine oil. Some stories aren't visible from the outside. Margaret never gave herself the chance to learn his. Claire invited Ethan over for Sunday dinner. She hoped, maybe this time would be different. Maybe her mother would finally see what she saw. Dinner began politely. Margaret asked where Ethan grew up. He answered. She asked about his work. He answered. She asked about his parents. His smile faded. My mom passed away when I was 19. Margaret simply nodded. No father. He left when I was little. Silence settled across the table. Margaret took another sip of water. So no family. I have Claire. Claire reached for Ethan's hand beneath the table. Margaret noticed. She also noticed something else. You rent. Yes. You don't own a home? Not yet. And you're almost 33. Claire immediately recognized the tone. Mom. What? I'm asking questions. Ethan answered anyway. I've been saving. For what? My own architecture firm. Margaret leaned back. So a dream. A plan. A risky one. Claire finally spoke. Enough. Margaret looked surprised. I just want to know whether the man dating my daughter can provide stability. Ethan remained calm. I understand. No, Claire interrupted. You don't have to understand. Dinner ended 20 minutes later. No one touched dessert. Outside, Claire apologized before Ethan even started the truck. I'm so sorry. He smiled gently. You've apologized for her 3 times tonight. I know. You don't owe me that. I just wanted her to like you. He stared through the windshield. I don't think she wants to. Claire had no answer. Because deep down, she feared he was right. She wasn't proud of dinner. But she told herself she had done the right thing. Good mothers ask difficult questions. Didn't they? Still, something about Ethan refusing to argue bothered her. Daniel had always argued. He had always known exactly what to say. Ethan simply listened. Why? 3 weeks later, Claire received a phone call that changed everything. The bookstore owner, Mrs. Reynolds, had suffered a stroke. The business would close indefinitely. Claire lost her job. She didn't cry immediately. She simply sat there, watching customers read the handwritten sign taped to the window. Closed until further notice. For the first time since college, she had nowhere to be tomorrow morning. Ethan arrived less than 15 minutes later. He hadn't been called. One of the cafe employees had seen Claire sitting outside and texted him. He quietly sat beside her. Neither spoke for almost 2 minutes. Finally, I guess I'm unemployed. He nodded. I guess you are. What if I never find another job? You will. What if I don't? We'll figure it out. She looked at him. We. He smiled. I wasn't planning on going anywhere. Claire leaned against his shoulder. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to cry. Meanwhile, Margaret saw only one thing. Her daughter had lost her job, and Ethan still couldn't financially support both of them. In her mind, that confirmed everything. Money had been Margaret's greatest fear since Daniel left. She remembered choosing between groceries and electricity. She remembered pretending to Claire that cereal for dinner was fun. She remembered selling her wedding necklace to pay rent. Security had become her religion. Love wasn't enough. Not anymore. Never again. That evening, Margaret sat across from Claire. You need to think realistically. I am. No. You aren't. Ethan can't even buy a house. Claire looked exhausted. Mom. He can't provide. He never promised to. Then what exactly is he offering? Claire answered without hesitation. Himself. Margaret almost laughed. Himself won't pay the mortgage. Claire stood. I'm going upstairs. You always leave when the conversation gets difficult. Claire stopped halfway up the stairs. Without turning around, she quietly replied, No. I leave when you stop listening. The bedroom door closed. Margaret remained downstairs. For the first time, she wondered if she was slowly losing her daughter. But instead of asking herself why, she blamed Ethan. The rain had been falling for hours. Claire had spent the entire morning sending out job applications. 23 applications. 23 polite rejections. The words began to blur together. We've decided to move forward with another candidate. We'll keep your resume on file. We appreciate your interest. Every email sounded different. Every rejection felt the same. She quietly closed her laptop and rubbed her eyes. Across the room, Ethan watched without saying a word. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a folded envelope on the coffee table. What is this? Claire asked. Open it. Inside was a cashier's check. $5,000. Claire immediately pushed it back. No. It's just until you find work. No. You don't have to. I said no. She looked at him, almost offended. I am not taking your savings. There are savings now. No, Ethan. They're meant for emergencies. This isn't your emergency. He smiled gently. It became mine the day I asked you to build a life with me. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Not because of the money, because she believed him. From the hallway, Margaret had heard every word. She hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but now she couldn't stop thinking about that envelope. $5,000. Where had it come from? An architect renting an apartment, driving a 20-year-old truck, trying to start his own business. Shouldn't have that kind of money lying around. Something didn't add up. And when something didn't make sense, Margaret had learned long ago to keep digging. The next morning, Margaret did something she never imagined herself doing. She followed Ethan. Not because she wanted to, because she convinced herself she had to. If Claire refused to protect herself, someone had to. She watched Ethan leave his apartment carrying a worn leather backpack. Instead of driving toward his office, he drove downtown, then past downtown, then into one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. Margaret frowned. What business did he have here? She stayed several cars behind. Ethan finally parked outside a small brick building with peeling white paint. There was no architecture firm, no client, no construction site. Instead, a faded sign above the entrance read, Haven House Hospice Center. Margaret watched him disappear inside. Her heart pounded. Why would he lie? She waited. 10 minutes. 20. 45. An hour. Finally, Ethan walked back outside. Only, he wasn't alone. An elderly woman in a wheelchair smiled up at him as he carefully adjusted a blanket over her legs. He knelt beside her, said something. She laughed. Then he hugged her before returning inside. Margaret couldn't hear a single word, but she could see the affection between them. She didn't understand. Who was she? For the first time, her certainty cracked. That evening, she couldn't stop thinking about the hospice. She searched Ethan's social media. Almost nothing. No luxury vacations. No flashy watches. No expensive restaurants. Hardly any posts at all. Only one photograph caught her attention. It showed Ethan standing beside an older woman in a hospital room. The caption simply read, "Still my favorite person." No explanation. No names. No hashtags. Margaret stared at the screen. If this was some elaborate act, it was a strange one. A week later, another SERP by Rise arrived. Claire came downstairs smiling. "I got an interview." Margaret hugged her immediately. "Oh, sweetheart." Claire laughed. "It's only an interview. It's a start." Then Claire hesitated. "Ethan knows the owner." Margaret's smile disappeared. "What?" "He recommended me." "So he pulled strings?" "No. He told them I was qualified." "You don't know that." "I do." Margaret folded her arms. "You don't build a future depending on favors." Claire took a slow breath. "It wasn't a favor." "Then why did they call you after months of silence?" Claire looked directly into her mother's eyes. "Because someone believes in me." The words landed harder than either woman expected. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She wandered into the attic looking for an old tax folder. Instead, she found something else. A dusty cardboard box. Inside were dozens of old photographs, birthday cards, Claire's elementary school drawings, hospital paperwork from years ago, and a cassette recorder. She hadn't seen it in almost 20 years. Curious, she inserted the tape. Static filled the room. Then, Daniel's voice. Young, warm, familiar. "If Claire ever hears this, I hope she'll know I never stopped loving her." Margaret froze. Her hands trembled. She had completely forgotten this tape existed. She remembered now. Daniel had recorded it the week before leaving. She had hidden it, then convinced herself she'd thrown it away. She pressed stop. She couldn't listen anymore. Not yet. Not tonight. 3 days later, Claire called her mother in tears. "Mom." "What happened?" "It's Ethan." Margaret's stomach tightened. "What did he do?" "He didn't do anything." "Then why are you crying?" "I found something." Ethan had left for work. While searching for a charger in his desk drawer, Claire accidentally found a large envelope. Inside, bank statements, medical receipts, legal paperwork, and one document that made her heart stop. A loan application. Rejected. The amount requested, $180,000. There was also a handwritten note. "If the bank refuses again, I'll sell the truck." Claire stared at the words. She knew what that truck meant to him. It was the last thing connecting him to his grandfather. Why would he sell it? She kept reading. Then she found another page. A list of monthly payments. Hospice. Medication. Private nursing care. Everything was being paid. For the elderly woman Margaret had seen. Claire whispered to herself. "Who is she?" She called Ethan immediately. No answer. She called again. Straight to voicemail. Fear rushed in. Had he been hiding enormous debt? Was this why he hadn't bought a house? Was this why he worked late every night? Or was there something even bigger he hadn't told her? For the first time since they met, Claire realized she didn't know the whole story. And somewhere across town, Margaret looked out her kitchen window. She had spent months believing Ethan was hiding something terrible. Now, she finally had proof he was hiding something. But she had no idea. The truth was nothing like she imagined. Claire didn't know how long she'd been sitting there. 10 minutes. Maybe an hour. The papers scattered across the floor no longer looked like financial records. They looked like pieces of a life Ethan had never talked about. Not because he didn't trust her. Because he was carrying too much by himself. She picked up one receipt after another. Monthly hospice payments. Prescription costs. Physical therapy invoices. Private nursing visits. Every payment had come from Ethan's account. There wasn't a single late fee. Not one missed payment. Yet his own savings account had barely enough money left to cover a month's rent. Claire whispered into the empty apartment. "What are you doing?" At the bottom of one page was a name. Eleanor Brooks. Not Mom. Not Grandma. Just Eleanor Brooks. Claire searched through the remaining papers. There were no birth certificates. No adoption records. Nothing explaining who Eleanor was. Only years of receipts. Years. Whatever this was, it hadn't started recently. That evening, Ethan finally returned home. The moment he opened the apartment door, he saw the papers. He knew. Claire had found everything. Neither of them spoke. He quietly closed the door behind him. "I'm sorry," Claire said first. "I wasn't looking for this." "I know. I thought I was grabbing a phone charger." "I know." She held up one receipt. "Who is Eleanor?" Ethan stared at the floor. For several long seconds, he couldn't answer. "I wanted to tell you." "Then why didn't you?" "I was waiting." "For what?" "For a day when it wouldn't change the way you looked at me." Claire slowly stood. "I don't understand." He finally looked at her. "My mother didn't die when I was 19. Claire blinked. "What?" "I lied." The room became perfectly still. "My biological mother left when I was 5. He swallowed hard. "The woman who raised me, Eleanor, wasn't related to me." Claire frowned. "You mean?" "I met her at a foster home." Silence. "I was 8. My caseworker brought me there after another foster placement failed. There was this volunteer, Eleanor. She couldn't legally adopt anymore because of her age. So she just stayed." Claire listened without interrupting. "She came every Wednesday. Every birthday. Every Christmas. When I turned 18. She told me." His voice cracked. "That family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes. It's the people who refuse to leave." Claire slowly sat back down. Every assumption she'd made over the past hour dissolved. "So, you're paying for her hospice care?" He nodded. "She has no children. No husband. No siblings left. I'm all she's got." Claire looked around the apartment. "The loan. They rejected it. The truck. I was going to sell it. To keep paying." Claire suddenly remembered something. The day she'd lost her job. The cashier's check. The $5,000. "You gave me your emergency savings." He smiled softly. "You were my emergency." Claire covered her mouth. She couldn't stop crying. Not because he had hidden the truth. Because she'd spent hours believing the worst about the man who had quietly sacrificed everything. Across town, Margaret received an unexpected phone call. It was from the director of Haven House Hospice. "Mrs. Collins?" "Yes. I'm sorry to bother you. We're trying to reach Ethan Carter." "He's not answering." Margaret immediately felt her stomach tighten. "Is something wrong?" "I'm afraid Eleanor has taken a turn for the worse." She didn't know why they had called her. Then she remembered. The day she'd followed Ethan. One of the nurses had seen her speaking with him in the parking lot. They assumed she was family. Margaret hesitated only a moment before driving to the hospice herself. The building looked smaller than she remembered. Quieter. Inside, families sat together in silence. Some prayed. Others simply held hands. Margaret had never liked hospitals. Too many memories. Too many goodbyes. She walked slowly down the hallway until she found room 214. The door was slightly open. She stopped. Inside, Ethan sat beside Eleanor's bed, holding her hand, reading aloud from an old paperback novel. His voice was calm, gentle. The elderly woman smiled weakly each time he turned a page. Margaret stayed in the hallway, unseen, listening. "You always skip this chapter," Eleanor whispered. Ethan laughed. "You hated this chapter." "I still do. You made me promise." "I know." She squeezed his hand. "You kept every promise." "So did you." "No. I didn't. You wanted a family. I couldn't give you one." Ethan shook his head. "You already did." Margaret felt something inside her break. Not because of what she heard. Because of what she remembered. Daniel. The promises. The lies. For 21 years, she had believed every charming man eventually became Daniel. She had judged Ethan before allowing him to become himself. On the drive home, Margaret didn't turn on the radio. She replayed every conversation she'd ever had with Ethan. Every question. Every accusation. Every assumption. None of them had been fair. For the first time in decades, she asked herself a question she'd avoided. Had she really been protecting Claire? Or had she simply been protecting herself from ever feeling that old pain again? The answer frightened her, because she already knew it. 3 days later, Eleanor passed away peacefully. The funeral was small. Only 12 people attended. Most were former hospice volunteers. Claire stood beside Ethan throughout the service. Margaret stayed near the back, unsure whether she even belonged there. When the service ended, the pastor spoke quietly to Ethan. "I found this among Eleanor's belongings." He handed Ethan a sealed envelope, written across the front. "For Ethan, open after I'm gone." Ethan stared at it. His hands trembled. He wasn't ready. Not yet. But somehow, Margaret knew. Whatever was inside that envelope was about to change everything. The cemetery became almost silent. Only the wind remained. Ethan stared at Eleanor's handwriting. She had written birthday cards with that same careful script. Christmas notes. Encouraging letters before every college exam. Now those familiar letters spelled out what would be her final conversation with him. He wasn't sure he wanted to read it. Some goodbyes felt permanent only after the last words were spoken. Claire quietly walked beside him. She didn't ask what was inside. She simply slipped her hand into his. For several moments, neither of them moved. Finally, Ethan broke the seal. The letter began simply. "My dear Ethan, if you're reading this, then you ignored my advice and spent far too much money keeping an old woman alive." Despite everything, Ethan smiled. That sounded exactly like Eleanor. He kept reading. "You've spent your entire life believing you owe me something. You never did. The greatest gift you ever gave me wasn't money. It was allowing me to spend my last 25 years watching the little boy from the foster home become the man I always believed he would be." Claire quietly wiped away tears. The next paragraph made Ethan stop reading aloud. He read it silently, then read it again. His breathing changed. Claire noticed immediately. "What is it?" He slowly handed her the letter. The final page read, "There is one last promise I need you to keep. Stop sacrificing your own future because you think that's what love requires. The savings account I told you never to touch. It's yours now. I opened it the year you graduated college. Every birthday check you insisted I spend. Every Christmas gift card. Every dollar you secretly left inside my purse after grocery shopping. I saved all of it. Go build your architecture firm. Go marry the woman who sees your heart. And if her mother ever learns to see it too, forgive her. People who carry old pain sometimes mistake fear for wisdom. Love them anyway." Ethan closed his eyes. He couldn't speak. Not because of the money, because even now, Eleanor had been thinking about everyone except herself. Margaret had come intending to leave flowers anonymously. She never expected to hear Eleanor's final words. People who carry old pain sometimes mistake fear for wisdom. The sentence echoed through her mind. It described her perfectly. Not as a villain, as someone who had never healed. She realized something painful. For 21 years, every decision she'd made about Claire's relationships had been based on one man, Daniel. She hadn't been evaluating the men standing in front of her. She'd been punishing ghosts. That evening, Margaret did something she hadn't done since her divorce. She unlocked the bottom drawer of her bedroom dresser. Inside was the old cassette recorder, Daniel's wedding ring, a faded anniversary card, and dozens of unopened letters. Letters Daniel had mailed during the first years after he left. She had never read them. Not one. She simply couldn't. Not then. Tonight, she opened the first envelope. The letter wasn't an excuse. It wasn't asking for forgiveness. It wasn't blaming anyone. It was simply an apology. Daniel admitted he'd been selfish. He admitted he'd been ashamed. He admitted walking away had been the greatest mistake of his life. Margaret quietly cried. Not because the letter erased the past. Nothing could. But because she'd spent 2 decades imagining words that had never existed. She had carried anger that no longer had anywhere to go. She folded the letter carefully. For the first time, she felt tired of carrying it. 2 days later, Margaret called Claire. "Can you both come over tonight?" Claire immediately became nervous. "What happened?" "I just need to say something." Nobody spoke for almost a minute. Finally, Margaret stood. She looked directly at Ethan. Then, she surprised both of them. I'm sorry. Silence. I judged you before I knew you. I questioned your character. I questioned your future. I questioned your love for Claire. She swallowed. I was wrong. Ethan remained quiet. Margaret continued. I kept telling myself I was protecting my daughter. The truth. She smiled sadly. I was protecting the frightened version of myself that Daniel left behind. Claire's eyes immediately filled with tears. Margaret turned toward her daughter. I'm sorry I made you believe love had to pass my approval before it deserved a chance. Claire stood and wrapped her arms around her mother. Neither woman spoke. Some apologies don't need extra words. After a long moment, Margaret faced Ethan again. I don't expect forgiveness. Ethan smiled gently. I know. You don't. No. Then why are you smiling? Because Eleanor would have told me to forgive you before you even asked. Margaret laughed through tears. So, we're okay. Ethan nodded. We're okay. For the first time, Margaret saw exactly what Claire had seen from the beginning. Not perfection. Not wealth. Not charm. Just a genuinely good man. The money Eleanor had quietly saved wasn't enough to make Ethan wealthy, but it was enough for a beginning. He opened the small architecture firm he dreamed about for years. Not because someone rescued him, because someone believed in him. Claire found a new position managing community programs for the city's public library. She smiled just as often as she always had. Only now, there was someone smiling beside her. Margaret volunteered every Thursday at Haven House Hospice. At first, she thought she was going there to honor Eleanor. Eventually, she realized she was healing herself. She spent hours sitting with patients who had no visitors, listening, holding hands, learning stories. She discovered something unexpected. Every family carried invisible scars. Not everyone allowed those scars to become walls. The photograph became Ethan's favorite decoration. Visitors often asked, "Is that your family?" He always answered the same way. Yes. No further explanation. None was needed. On a warm spring afternoon, the backyard looked almost identical to the one from the beginning of this story. The same string lights. The same flower garden. The same family home. Only one thing had changed. This time, Margaret stood in front of everyone holding a small velvet box. She turned toward Ethan, smiling. I believe this belongs to you. It was the engagement ring. The very one Ethan had quietly returned after she rejected him months earlier. His eyes widened. You kept it. I was hoping I'd eventually have the chance to give it back. Claire laughed through happy tears. Ethan slowly knelt. Not because it was planned. Because somehow, this was exactly how it was meant to happen. Claire Collins. You've been my safest place through every storm. Will you marry me? She didn't hesitate. Yes. Applause filled the backyard. But Margaret barely heard it. She watched her daughter laugh. Really laugh. The kind of laughter she'd almost taken away forever. Margaret finally understood something that had taken half her lifetime to learn. Pain can teach valuable lessons. But if you let it make every decision, it eventually begins stealing the very future you're trying to protect. She smiled as Ethan spun Claire beneath the lights. Then she whispered the words she wished she'd learned years earlier. The right person doesn't erase your past. They prove your past doesn't have to decide your future. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.